Worry is the fruit of misplaced trust. It doesn't appear without a root system feeding it beneath the surface. Worry grows in the soil of uncertainty, watered by fear, and nurtured by a belief that we are alone in our struggles. But the truth is, worry is not just an emotional disturbance. It is spiritual evidence. It exposes the foundation we've been building on. When you find yourself worrying constantly, it's not simply because your situation is difficult. It's because your trust has migrated from the eternal to the temporary, from the rock to the sand. Worry means you've placed your confidence in something that can fail you. It means you're leaning on resources that have limits, systems that can collapse, people who can disappoint, and outcomes you can't control. If your sense of peace is built on how much is in your bank account, how people treat you, or how things turn out in the physical, then your peace is always subject to change. That's why worry rushes in, because the thing holding your trust isn't holding steady. Faith, when placed in the wrong object, becomes fear. When you trust your job more than your source, you'll worry when the company downsizes. When you trust your health more than your healer, you'll panic when the report comes. When you trust people more than your provider, their rejection will make you feel abandoned. The problem isn't the storm, it's what you're anchored to. You weren't designed to carry what you're stressing over. The human soul was never meant to be a warehouse for anxiety. It was built as a temple for divine trust. That's why stress breaks you down. It's foreign to your original design. The mind becomes overwhelmed, the body reacts with tension, and the spirit feels disconnected. Because the burden is unauthorized. It's like trying to carry bricks on a bridge meant for bicycles. It will eventually collapse under the weight of what wasn't supposed to be there. God never asked you to carry worry. In fact, He commanded the opposite. Cast your cares upon me, He says, because I care for you. The word cast isn't casual. It means to hurl, to throw it away from yourself. It means there's no ownership of the issue once it's handed over. But the problem is that many of us cast our cares like a fishing line, throwing it out but still holding the string, waiting to reel it back in. We don't surrender it. We loan it. We pray about it, but then pick it right back up with anxious thoughts 5 minutes later. That's not trust. That's transaction without release. The reason worry often persists is because deep down, we still think we're responsible for outcomes we can't control. We think if we just work harder, think longer, or try smarter, we can fix it. That belief is deception. Worry tricks you into thinking you're being productive. But in reality, worry is energy spent on imagining failure. It produces no solution, no strategy, no fruit, only fatigue. It doesn't solve the problem, it multiplies it. It steals sleep, robs clarity, and drains spiritual power. Worry is like interest paid on a debt you don't even owe yet. When trust is properly placed in the one who never changes, the fruit is peace. Not the peace the world gives, which depends on circumstances, but peace that passes understanding. That kind of peace doesn't make sense to the natural mind. It's the calm in the storm. It's the assurance in the middle of delay. It's the quiet confidence that even though I don't know how, I know who. And the who is faithful. The who never fails. The who spoke the universe into existence and still knows the number of hairs on your head. Misplaced trust creates spiritual instability. You'll be up one day and down the next, full of hope in the morning and full of doubt by night. That's what happens when your trust is in shifting sand. But when trust is anchored in God, there's no panic in the storm. Because you know the one who sleeps in the boat isn't afraid of the waves. He's not nervous about the outcome because he wrote the ending. And the secret is simple: give it to Him. Lay it down. Release the illusion of control. You were never meant to solve it in your own strength. You were meant to surrender it in faith. And the moment you do, the weight lifts because the burden was never yours to carry. God doesn't respond to emotion, He responds to faith. This truth must be written on the tablet of your heart, because we often mistake divine compassion for emotional reaction. Yes, God is compassionate. Yes, He is touched by the feeling of our infirmities, but heaven's movements are not triggered by panic. God is not manipulated by tears, nor is He swayed by anxiety. You can cry for days, scream into the night, or beg in desperation, but if faith is not present, your emotion becomes a monologue, not a transaction. Emotion may get your attention, but it is faith that gets God's attention. Panic is not the language of the kingdom. Fear does not translate into miracles. God doesn't respond to how loudly you cry, but how deeply you trust. When Jairus came to Jesus about his dying daughter, Jesus ignored the news of her death and said, "Do not be afraid." He didn't say, "Cry more," or panic harder. He said, believe. Because faith is the currency of the kingdom. It is the legal tender of heaven. Without it, nothing moves. With it, nothing can stop what God has already purposed. Emotion is real, but emotion must be submitted to truth. You are allowed to feel, but feelings are not allowed to lead. If you are always driven by how you feel, you will be up and down like waves tossed by the wind. The one who trusts in the Lord learns how to override emotion with conviction. That's what faith is. Faith is a decision, not just a feeling. Faith is choosing to believe what God said even when your tears blur your vision. Faith is saying, God, I don't understand this, but I trust you. I can't trace you, but I still trust you. There comes a point where you must lift your hands and release the weight you've been carrying with the declaration. This is above my pay grade. That one sentence is a spiritual shift. It is a surrender that places the situation into the hands of one who sees the end from the beginning. It's the recognition that the outcome is beyond your calculation, beyond your strategy, beyond your ability to fix. And heaven responds with peace. Because when you hand over your limitation, God releases His unlimited provision. Heaven waits for that moment of surrender, not the performance of emotion, but the position of trust. When you shift from fear to faith, the kingdom begins to activate. God can do more with your surrender than He can with your struggle. He's not looking for your strength. He's looking for your agreement. He's waiting for you to agree that He is still God, that He is still in control, that He is not intimidated by your storm, that He has never failed, and that your situation isn't an exception to His promises. Some people pray but don't trust. They speak the words but carry the weight. That's not faith. Faith is not just saying it, it's resting in it. Faith is silence after the prayer, not because there's nothing left to say, but because there's nothing left to worry about. Faith says, I've put it in God's hands and I know His hands are capable. That's when heaven moves. Not when the volume goes up, but when the heart bows low in trust. That's when the King rises from His throne, not to pity but to perform, because faith authorizes heaven's activity. Miracles don't come through emotional breakdowns. They come through spiritual boldness. The woman with the issue of blood didn't beg, she believed. The centurion didn't cry, he declared, just say the word. And Jesus marveled at that faith, not at their situation, not at their emotion, but at their faith. That is what causes heaven to say, now we can work. When God sees that you've let go, He begins to lift up. When He sees that you've stopped striving, He starts shifting. There is power in surrender, and there is movement in faith. God doesn't need to be convinced by your emotion. He needs to be trusted through your obedience. It is not the panic of your heart, but the posture of your spirit that authorizes divine intervention. When you release the issue to Him, you are no longer fighting for control. You are standing under covenant. And covenant says, if I trust Him, He will take care of it. That's when the atmosphere changes. That's when what was impossible becomes inevitable. Because faith has entered the room, and heaven always honors faith. The kingdom operates on surrender, not control. This is one of the most difficult truths to embrace, especially in a world that glorifies self-sufficiency, domination, and human strategy. But in the kingdom of God, what brings results is not how tightly you hold on, but how freely you let go. Control is an illusion. It gives you the sense that you are managing the outcome, when in reality, you're only managing your own anxiety. The more you try to control, the more you lose peace. The more you grip it, the more it slips through your fingers. That's because control belongs to the king, not the citizen. The moment you try to fix what only God can repair, you are stepping into unauthorized territory. The kingdom of heaven is not built on effort. It's built on order. That means when you are out of order, you are out of flow. When you take control, you remove God's jurisdiction. You unintentionally declare, I trust myself more than I trust you. And when that happens, heaven steps back. Not in punishment, but in principle. God will not override your will. He honors surrender, not manipulation. And that's why so many are worn out. Not because God isn't moving, but because we won't stop moving long enough to let Him. There's a difference between stewardship and control. Stewardship means managing what God has placed in your hand with faithfulness. Control means trying to force the results with fear. One is rooted in trust, the other is rooted in pride. And pride is a silent enemy of the kingdom. It makes you think you have to make it happen. But the truth is, your life, your calling, your family, your future, none of it was meant to be held together by your strength. When God is king, He takes full responsibility for what's submitted to Him. If you're still holding it, then you're still responsible for it. But if you lay it down, heaven becomes accountable. That's why the secret is not in doing more. You can fast more, pray louder, serve harder, plan deeper, and still be stressed, still be confused, still feel stuck. Because none of those things work without surrender. The power is not in how much you do, it's in how deeply you yield. Surrender unlocks favor. Surrender releases angels. Surrender breaks cycles. You don't need to control what God already conquered. You need to trust the finished work, not strive to recreate it. The kingdom functions like a river. It flows. But control builds dams. It clogs the channel. It resists the spirit. It interrupts the process. The more you control, the more you block. But surrender tears down the barrier. It opens up the floodgates for God to move in ways you couldn't imagine. That's why some people who do less in the natural receive more in the spirit. Because they've mastered the art of yielding. They've tapped into the rhythm of heaven, where trust becomes the strategy. In the kingdom, rest is warfare. Obedience is victory. Stillness is power. These don't make sense to the carnal mind, but they are the weapons of the surrendered. When Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours be done," it wasn't resignation, it was dominion. That was the language of the kingdom. He wasn't giving up. He was taking over by letting go. That is the posture God responds to. That is the environment where miracles break out. Because God is not waiting on your performance. He's waiting on your release. You don't have to run the world. You don't have to micromanage outcomes. You don't have to know every step of the journey before you take the first one. You just have to lay it down. You just have to say, "I surrender control. I release my grip. I give the weight to you." And when you do, you step into kingdom alignment. And when you're in alignment, grace flows. Doors open. Provision finds you. Clarity emerges. Because the weight you tried to carry was never yours to begin with. The king takes care of what's submitted to the throne. Control brings pressure. Surrender brings peace. And peace is proof that heaven is in charge. Peace is the evidence that you've truly given it to God. Not your words, not your declarations, not even your prayers, but your peace. Because peace is not just a feeling, it is a spiritual indicator. It reveals whether the burden is in God's hands or still lingering in yours. If you've truly handed it over, your mind will rest. Your heart will quiet down. Your emotions will stop wrestling. That's not because the situation has changed, but because your position in the situation has shifted. You're no longer carrying the weight. You've transferred it to the king. Peace doesn't mean the storm disappears. Peace means you've built your house on the rock, and the wind no longer shakes your foundation. It's possible to walk through fire and still remain calm. Not because you don't feel the heat, but because you know the one walking with you is fireproof. Peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of trust. And trust only comes when you have let go of control, released your need to understand, and surrendered the outcome. Peace is spiritual rest. It is the internal witness that heaven is working, even when your eyes see nothing. If your mind is still racing, if your heart is still heavy, if your sleep is still broken, then somewhere along the line, you've picked it back up. You said you gave it to God. But worry came back and whispered, "What if he doesn't?" And instead of rebuking that lie, you entertained it. That's how you know surrender wasn't complete. Because complete surrender produces rest. Rest is not laziness, it's spiritual confidence. It says, "I've done all I can. Now it's in the hands of the one who can do all things." Peace is a byproduct of alignment. When your soul is in agreement with God's sovereignty, the storm outside can rage, but the storm inside remains still. You don't need answers. You need alignment. When the soul is misaligned, peace vanishes. You try to manufacture it with distractions, routines, even religion. But true peace cannot be fabricated. It is a fruit of trust. It grows where faith is planted. It blooms where surrender is rooted. It is heaven's yes to your act of letting go. People often confuse peace with circumstantial relief, but peace has nothing to do with ease. Jesus slept in a storm, not because there was no danger, but because there was no doubt. His heart was anchored in the Father's will. That's the kind of peace that surpasses understanding. It makes no logical sense. It doesn't fit the facts. It breaks the rules of reason, but it reigns. And when that kind of peace fills your heart, it's undeniable proof that you've stopped wrestling and started resting. When peace shows up, it means the king has taken over. It means heaven has received the weight of what you were carrying. It means the case has moved from your courtroom to God's throne room. And that shift is felt in your spirit before it is seen in your situation. That's how the kingdom works, from the inside out. The external doesn't validate the internal. The internal governs the external. When peace enters your soul, it means you've stepped into divine governance. Heaven has taken jurisdiction. Until that moment, you're still holding something you were never meant to carry. You might not admit it out loud, but your lack of peace reveals it. You're still trying to fix it, still rehearsing conversations, still anticipating outcomes, still drafting scenarios in your mind. That's control in disguise. But once you truly hand it over, you stop needing to know. You stop demanding updates. You stop fighting to be understood or trying to force a breakthrough. Because peace whispers, "It is finished," even while your eyes still see delay. Peace is the most powerful indicator that the transaction of faith is complete. It's God's receipt in your spirit that the burden has been received in full. And when you feel that peace, deep, settled, unshakable peace, it means you've stepped out of the problem and into His presence. And in His presence, you don't need proof. You just need trust. God can't fix what you won't release. This is a principle many struggle with, not because they don't love God, but because they haven't yet learned to trust Him completely. The hands that refuse to let go are the same hands that prevent the miracle. God is not in the business of forcing submission. He waits for it. He honors your will. And if you choose to hold on, He will not pry your fingers open. The kingdom does not operate through coercion, it operates through consent. Heaven is activated by agreement, not anxiety. God will wait for you to give Him what you keep trying to fix, control, or figure out on your own. Many times we say we've given it to God, but in reality, we've only placed it on temporary loan. We talk to Him about it in prayer, but we never truly release it. We hand it to Him on Sunday and pick it back up on Monday. And the longer we grip it, the heavier it becomes. Not because it grew, but because we were never meant to carry it. Burdens that belong in God's hands break down the human soul when carried too long. That pressure, that stress, that weariness, it's the fruit of holding what was meant to be surrendered. God is not just waiting for your prayer. He's waiting for your permission. He is the Almighty, yes, but He operates within the boundaries of relational partnership. If you're gripping that situation, clinging to that offense, trying to manipulate that outcome, God will not wrestle it away from you. He is a king, not a thief. He receives what is freely given, not what is tightly withheld. That's why breakthrough is often delayed, not because God lacks power, but because we lack release. He's not going to override your will to perform His will. He's going to wait until your posture says, "Lord, I trust You more than I trust myself." Surrender is not weakness. It is divine partnership. It is saying, "God, I recognize the limits of my understanding, and I yield to the unlimited wisdom of Your Spirit." That moment of surrender shifts everything. Because what you release, God replaces. When you let go of the burden, He gives you strategy. When you let go of control, He gives you clarity. When you let go of fear, He gives you peace. But the exchange won't happen until the release happens. The transaction of grace is triggered by trust. When you continue to hold it, you are blocking the flow of heaven's wisdom. You can't receive God's strategy while clinging to your own. There's no room for divine insight when your mind is flooded with human reasoning. The strategy you need for your next season isn't coming through striving. It's coming through surrender. But the moment your grip loosens, revelation flows. God says, "Now that I have your full attention, let me show you what to do." God cannot pour new wine into a vessel already full. He cannot place fresh vision in a mind clouded with fear. He cannot give divine instruction to a heart that won't let go of its own agenda. Release creates space, and space attracts glory. As long as you're occupied with holding, fixing, managing, and controlling, you're too full to receive. But when you empty your hands before Him, heaven begins to fill them. The moment of release is the moment of divine download. Sometimes, God will even allow the weight of the burden to increase, not as punishment, but as preparation. He allows the pressure to build so that eventually you will come to the end of your strength and say, "God, I can't do this anymore." And heaven responds, "Finally, now we can." Because until you surrender it, you are responsible for it. But the moment you give it up, heaven becomes legally responsible. And what God is responsible for, He always provides for. So stop gripping what's crushing you. Open your hands. Loosen your heart. Clear your mind. Let it go not into the void, but into the hands of the only one who can do something about it. And as soon as you do, you'll see something powerful happen. The burden lifts, the fog clears, and the strategy you were praying for begins to unfold. Because God doesn't fix what you pretend to surrender. He fixes what you actually release. You don't have to understand it, just obey it. This is where many get stuck. Not because they don't have faith, but because they keep waiting for clarity before moving. They want the details before the direction. They want the explanation before the obedience. But in the kingdom, understanding is not a prerequisite for action. Obedience is. God never said, figure it out. He said, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That's not a suggestion. It's an instruction. Because human understanding is limited, but divine direction is unlimited. Obedience doesn't require comprehension. If you had to understand everything God is doing before you obeyed, you would never move. Kingdom advancement is built on trust, not logic. Your mind will often try to interfere with your spirit's instructions. It will analyze, question, hesitate, and delay. But the spirit already knows what the mind is trying to catch up to when God speaks. You move. Not because it makes sense, but because he cannot lie. His instruction may seem unusual, his timing may feel uncomfortable, and his methods may look unconventional, but his voice can be trusted. Breakthrough doesn't happen when you master the plan. Breakthrough happens when you follow the voice. The blessing is in the obedience. When Abraham was told to leave his country, God didn't give him a map. He gave him a word. Go to a land I will show you. That means Abraham had to start walking before he had all the answers. That's how the kingdom works. Obedience opens the next instruction. God unfolds purpose progressively, not all at once. And he does it that way so you'll depend on him daily, not just when you need a miracle. Obedience is the bridge between promise and manifestation. It is the act of saying, I trust you more than I trust my logic. That's kingdom wisdom. The carnal mind wants guarantees, contracts, blueprints. But the Spirit of God says, walk by faith, not by sight. That's where power is released. That's where miracles show up, in the place of radical, immediate, quiet obedience. Even when it seems like nothing is happening, the very act of obedience is breaking ground in the unseen realm. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is not speaking in tongues, not preaching, not giving. It's going to bed in peace. Give it to him and go to sleep. That's not laziness, that's divine trust. That's a childlike faith that says, my Father is handling it. Sleep becomes a weapon against anxiety. Rest becomes a declaration of trust. You don't have to run the numbers, analyze the risk, predict the outcome. You just have to obey what he said last. And until he speaks again, your job is to rest, not to reason. Trying to figure it out can become a spiritual distraction. You'll start calling your worry wisdom, and your overthinking discernment. But the truth is, many times we delay obedience because we're afraid of letting go of control. We say we're waiting on God, but really God is waiting on us to stop questioning and start moving. Understanding can wait. Obedience can't. When he says forgive, do it. When he says give, release it. When he says walk away, go. Even if you don't understand why, especially if you don't understand why. Faith doesn't live in explanation, it lives in execution. When the servants at the wedding in Cana obeyed Jesus' illogical instruction to pour water into wine jars, they didn't understand it. But obedience produced the miracle. When Peter cast the net on the other side, even after fishing all night, he didn't understand it. But obedience produced the overflow. When Naaman dipped in the Jordan River 7 times, he didn't understand it. But obedience produced the healing. The pattern is clear. Obedience opens the supernatural. The kingdom doesn't require your analysis. It requires your alignment. And alignment begins when you decide, even if I don't know how, I know who. That's what calms the heart and settles the mind. When you obey without needing to know every step, you walk into blessings that others miss because they were waiting for perfect conditions. But faith never waits for the weather. It moves at the word. So when the instruction comes, don't delay. Don't second guess. Don't wait for confirmation after confirmation. If he said it, move. If he whispered it, trust it. If he confirmed it, step. Because your obedience is the evidence that you trust the King more than your own understanding. And that is what heaven honors. Faith that walks even in the dark. My friend, the secret is simple, but it is not shallow. It is not found in striving harder or thinking longer. It is found in surrender. The world says fight for control, but the kingdom says release it. The world says worry is normal, but the kingdom says peace is your inheritance. You were not designed to carry what only God can handle. The weight you feel is not proof of responsibility. It is proof of misalignment. Hear this today. The King takes full responsibility for what you fully surrender. As long as it's in your hands, heaven stands still. But the moment you say, Lord, I give this to you, that moment things begin to shift. the heavens open, angels are assigned, peace becomes your portion. And rest, divine, deep, unshakable rest, floods your soul. This is not weakness. This is kingdom protocol. You don't need to understand the how when you've obeyed the who. You don't have to carry what the cross already conquered. So stop rehearsing it in your mind. Stop replaying it in your heart. Stop managing what you were called to release. The secret is give it to God and stop worrying. When you let go, God steps in. When you bow in trust, heaven stands to attention. And when you finally say, this is above my pay grade, your Father says, now watch me do what only I can do. The kingdom belongs to the surrendered. Let that be you starting now.